Thank you, Julia. And we actually got two Ave Marias this morning. That beautiful arpeggiated piece she played before service was an adaptation of Gounod's Ave Maria. It was really beautiful. I like that adaptation. It was really nice. So we got two Ave Marias for the price of one. The sacred reading this morning is from the Soundarya Lahari by Adi Shankaracharya, verses 1 and 2. Shiva is able to function only when united with Shakti. Without her, even he cannot stir. How then could one speak or act without the presence of the Divine Mother? O Devi, you are the supreme cause of all manifestation. You are the ocean of compassion, whose waves of grace flow into all worlds. Without your glance, even the gods lose their brilliance. In this church, we give lip service. We open our prayers with Father, Mother, God. And even in seminary, we grasp the fact that we are building upon or even returning to the earliest roots of Western religion, Judeo-Christianity. Reverend Brown used to say that we were very close to the Gnostic Christians, but still culturally, the Bible, the New Testament, the Old Testament, it is Father-centric. Our Father which art in heaven. We have a picture of a man back here. And Aramaic scholar Rocco Errico, explained that the New Testament, along with the Old, those are framed within the cultural circumstance, the cultural perspective of those times. And so we metaphysically understand that the scriptures, and those stories, those allegories, at their face, are framed within a contemporary moment, over 2,000 years ago. And so we as metaphysicians, we understand that since they are allegory and they're symbolic of how we conduct our lives modernly, that that we have evolved past them. The Gnostics were actually very much in favor, and they had female ministers, female priests, and male priests. They believed in this union of a divine feminine and a divine masculine. They talked of God not as personified male with the beard. It was a demiurge, which was a collective consciousness of all of this multifaceted deity, the demiurge, of which sprung out creation. And that is what we have kind of returned to here, to make sure that the divine is accessible and we see ourselves in the divine, if it is not personified. Because the divine, again, is complete, encompassing all things male, all things female, all things masculine, all things so-called feminine. The Hermetic teachings, they explain to us that all things exist in duality, good and evil. Where there's abundance, there is poverty. Where there is winning, there is losing. And of course, masculine and feminine. And even at their most extremes, they still exist in sort of a quantum entanglement, if you will. Now, Hermeticism also teaches us that everything, all things, even the pew you're sitting in, are in motion. And what causes motion? Opposing forces. Things in duality. It's that tension that creates that motion. One of the most elementary examples of this is the magnetic forces, positive and negative poles. We have electricity, and I'm bordering on a simplistic explanation of it, but it's the free movement of electrons which are negatively charged towards positive forces, often protons. But in previous sermons, you've heard me talk about living in the flow and how I, especially in the past several months, have concentrated on living in the flow and what that means to me and how that has transformed my life. I love these words from Reverend Jim's responsive reading last week. The Spirit fills all space and flows through everything. There is no place where it is not. I recognize this Spirit in everything and in everyone. His words, Reverend Jim. So it is with the divine flow in its masculine and feminine forms. This flow, again, exists because of the simultaneous tensions and yet balance between what the Taoists call yin and yang, what First Nations in the Americas call solar, and lunar. And metaphysically, again, the divine masculine and the divine feminine, divine mother and divine father. Now, focus on the divine feminine in the United States arose in about the 19th century, which was part of the early New Thought movement in the United States, which actually this church eventually evolved out of. And it first started in an aspect of New Thought called the Theosophists. And the early their mission statement was, there is no religion higher than the truth. And with Theosophy, the divine feminine was championed by a young woman, actually, named Helena Blavatsky. She was Russian-born but living in the United States at that time. And she asserted that spiritual advancement can only happen with women and men working together. Spiritual advancement can only happen when men and women work together. Now, over the years, this eventually aligned itself with the suffragist movement, because if they're going to do spiritually, then here on the earth plane for a reason, then men and women have to be able to work together, within the government. And of course, there was a movement of like co-ed Masonic lodges where men and women work together. Eventually, as this evolved through the New Thought movement and through American culture and British culture, there was one male spiritual leader named Aleister Crowley who cleverly determined that variations of Congress, if you will, this is a polite Sunday morning in a polite place, variations of Congress between man and a woman constituted a magical sacrament. So, but in common Western religion, the divine feminine is recognized through Mary, the mother of Jesus, but still she's considered subordinate. Now, in the 21st century, the divine masculine, the divine feminine traits have centered on or have entered into the sociological zeitgeist. And for better or for worse, certain traits we recognize, behaviors, careers, have broadly been kind of deemed one way or the other, for better or for worse, masculine or female. And metaphysically, when we look at the creation story, especially the first family, we understand them to be symbols of the 4 levels of self, the 4 levels of consciousness in which we interact with the world. Cain, it's the physical, Abel is the spiritual, Adam is the intellect, and Eve, the heart or the emotions. Physical, spiritual, mental, emotional. And we are here because we grasp the power and the beauty of the balance between all 4 levels of consciousness. Yet we can see plenty of examples in our lives where one is favored over the other. In dangerous moments, we're told to keep our wits about us, even though our intuition, our heart, could still serve us well. When skewing too far into the emotional, is labeled hysterical. Extremely funny moments are called hysterical. And in matters of faith, we can be spiritual beings trying to transcend the yoke of this physical burden of ours. But here's another take on Adam and Eve, which I find just so empowering. Because in Hebrew, Adam means man, humankind. And to me, that represents the physical existence. And because in Hebrew, the word for ground or earth is Adamah. But Eve, that's been Latinized through Greek, but going back to the Hebrew, it's not Eve, it's Chava, which means life, which means living. If you think back on the scripture, even the gods, not the goddesses, but the gods cannot move without Shakti. So again, the rabbis and Talmudic readings also say that Chava now is the mother of all living things. Brooke Gladstone on her radio show On the Media interviewed Douglas Rushkoff, who's a professor of digital economics at CUNY, and he was explaining how at one point he was called to meet with several tech billionaires, and they wanted, because of his expertise, they wanted his impression of their compounds. These compounds they were erecting around the world. One had in New Zealand, Costa Rica, the various parts around the globe, designed to protect them while the men when everything inevitably goes sideways, whether that is climate or society or both. And Professor Rushkoff mused, he goes, here are these men who have made their money, they made their billions by locking everything down to one and zeros. They are fixing everything. They're divining, which is the intellect. They are locking everything down. In essence, they're trying to intellectualize existence into certainty. And here they are, he mused, with that. They're doing that in the face of the forceful uncertainty of the divine feminine. The forceful uncertainty of the divine feminine. Now, according to a number of sources, Theosophist Helena Blavatsky, during the course of synthesizing esoteric practices around the world, was heavily influenced by Hinduism. And this is where we see the divine feminine in full glory. Returning to the Soundarya Lari, I'm going to repeat the sacred reading this morning. Shiva is able to function only when united with Shakti. Without her, even he cannot stir. How then could one speak or act without the presence of the Divine Mother? O Devi, you are the supreme cause of all manifestation. You are the ocean of compassion, whose waves of grace flow into all worlds. Without your glance, even the gods lose their brilliance. Now, the representations of Adam and Hava are amplified across the cosmos, if you will, of Hindu deities. The masculine Shiva and subordinate images and gods is almost always depicted seated. My guru K describes him as still. My metaphysical mind translates that to grounded and fixed. But Shakti is almost always depicted in motion. Like Hava, she is full of life. And that is the relationship between divine masculine and divine feminine in Western, but yet it may have changed. It has changed over the centuries in Western faith. In the Hindu Vedas, across the millenniums, Shiva and Shakti remain hand in hand, side by side. And yes, there are other, as I alluded, there are other named deities which emanate from them. But notice I said emanate from them. They are still part of Shiva and Shakti. And there's power to this. Several months ago, I started studying with a meditation guru who was steeped in Hindu meditation, specifically the Tantric movement. And at our first meeting, he asked, what did I need for meditation? And one of the questions he asked was about my parents and their effect on my faith. And I did admit that my father, after some talking, was not really physically affectionate. And so we decided he wanted me to sit in the lap of Shiva. And imagine myself, we're going to meditate, me sitting in the lap of this giant Shiva, strong and powerful, dressed in tiger skins, Shiva holding me like I'm a young child, like a young boy. And this really was a challenge to me. I was uncomfortable with it at first because my operating concept of the divine had gotten so economical in my metaphysical perspective of the divine. My operating concept of the divine does not have a lap, much less a gender. But of course, my guru reminded me, all things are expression of the divine, are they not? He began to use my words against me, which they really weren't against me. It's just reminding me of the totality of what I was for. Because each of us is a unique expression of the divine. So of course, why shouldn't I focus on a specific vibration of this divine source for a specific matter? And so I sat in the lap of the Divine Father, arms around me, to receive that comfort, to receive that physical embrace, that hold that I hadn't, that I hadn't gotten much as a boy. Now in Western society, Divine Mother is sugar and spice and everything nice, gentle, meek, and mild. But the truth of it is it's a natural law, that everything is in duality, even within the divine feminine. Where there is gentleness, there is power. Where there is meekness, there is ebullience. Where there is mildness, there is ferocity. Allow me to list you, again, as I said, Shakti is the divine feminine, but there are goddesses that emanate, again, just a facet of her. And I will read just a list of some of the variations that in Hindu that they call upon in time of need. Some of these names you will know, I will hit them. So there is Tara, the goddess who guides through troubles. She's actually depicted riding on the back of a tiger. Kamala, the lotus goddess. Kali, the destroyer. Sounds very dangerous, but how many times I remember my mother sometimes just coming in and saying, no, you're not going to do that. You know, we've got the one who, she who is lovely in the three worlds, she whose body is the world, the self-decapitated goddess, the fierce one, the widow goddess, the paralyzer, the outcast goddess. So over the millennia, of course, as there have been needs for a facet of the divine feminine, yes, they could have just prayed to to Shakti, or they could have prayed to Shiva, and yet this has helped them hone down just that energy, that facet of the divine for whatever case they need. It's not like Hellenic, where you have Zeus who cheats on Hera by disguising himself with the bull, and then Hera gets angry and has revenge, because those were independent gods and goddesses. They all emanate from the divine. It is just like a very complex prism of the divine. But of course, and that is not a foreign concept to us, is it not? Growing up, we were taught, we don't talk about it much in this church, but the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, three equal in one. And I know I was driving through, and there are people who lean more. There are some denominations that lean more on the Holy Spirit. There are some denominations that lean more on God, on God. There are some denominations that lean more on Jesus. I travel a lot around this country, and I don't know where it was, but it was west of here, and I saw a billboard that said, Jesus said, honor your mother and father. I thought, technically, but okay. It is, I got the point, And who am I to judge which aspect of the divine they lean on, for their needs? Back in high school, my friend Dan, they were selling a house. So his mother buried an upside down St. Joseph in the yard to encourage it to sell. Apparently I didn't realize St. Joseph, because I didn't go to St. Dominic's. I went to First United Methodist Church, but St. Joseph is the patron saint of real estate agents. And apparently it worked. But again, St. Joseph is just an emissary. We also have saints and archangels. A lot of times people in the metaphysical church do talk about being guided by archangels, which is where we get the word archetype, because they represent a specific facet of the divine. It just helps you get a handle on this infinite possibility that we call the divine intelligence. It helps you get a handle on it when you need to consult or tap into something higher than yourselves. So again, divine metaphysics, we hold that God is a totality in all things male and female. And considering the divine feminine in all her abundant ways, it reminds us that it's good to focus on a specific facet among the divine totality if we need it for a time. And yes, if it's in your soul's contract for this incarnation to dwell within a single aspect of the divine for the entirety of your time here on this planet, then it is right and it is perfect for you. And this is still perfect spiritual home for you. Just want you to know that in your spiritual toolbox, there's a wrench, there's a screwdriver, there's a jigsaw, there's a hammer, and you may only use the wrench for your entirety here, but just knowing that a hammer is available to you, that is the blessing of divine metaphysics. In my 20s, I was teaching clarinet to a young boy who was homeschooled. He was the oldest of 6 or 7 kids who were being homeschooled. And the mother explained to me one day, and I don't remember how it came in, but she explained to me that it is the woman who carries original sin. And at first I thought, because Eve's the one who came with the idea to eat the fruit, and it was, and then she said, no, that's not it. It said, it's the woman who carries original sin because she passes down the X chromosome, right? Because if I'm a male, I got the X chromosome for my mother. My father gave me the Y. So if we could somehow make people out of YY, then I guess there'd be no original sin. But I was through the X chromosome. that mothers are passing down the original sin through consecutive generations, down to their children. And so while she was trying to explain to me that through Eve we were all shouldering the blame for original sin, what I heard was, "Wow, mothers are powerful." And I can't help but think of a wonderful scene from the 1990s movie The Joy Luck Club, which some of you probably remember, may have heard of, but it was over 30 years ago. You probably don't remember what the plot is about. But it's a series of stories. It came from a book by Amy Tan about the relationships between mothers and daughters. The mothers are Chinese born. They immigrated to the United States and started their family here in the United States. And their daughters are Americanized. And it is the tension between them, not only as mother and daughter, but culturally, how these women were raised in China and how their daughters turned out and are moving forward under American society and American expectations. And there's this one scene of a mother, Ying Ying, she's a widow, and in her story she had little voice in her own marriage and is now living with her daughter and son-in-law, and her son-in-law who is petty and argumentative. And Ying Ying retreats to her bedroom while her daughter and her husband argue over something petty. And she can hear her daughter once again struggling to stake her claim and find her voice in this marriage over this domineering man. And Ying Ying delivers this internal monologue. And I remember it to this day because it reminded me of my own mother, who was saintly, but also, and it seemed very peaceful until the time was right. And here's Ying Ying's monologue. "All around this house, I see the signs. My daughter looks, but she does not see. This is a house that will break into pieces. It's not too late. All my pains, my regrets, I will gather them together. My daughter will hear me calling, even though I've said no words. She will climb the stairs to find me. She will be scared because at first her eyes will see nothing. She will feel in her heart this place where she hides her fears. She will know I am waiting like a tiger in the trees, now ready to leap out and cut her spirit loose." A couple weeks ago, Reverend Fabienne dropped this truth bomb on us. As metaphysicians, we now look within. We know to look within for what we need. But at birth, we are conditioned through human experience to feel separated from the divine. And so we must look to our mother and father for answers. And when I ruminated on this, I remembered a moment in Sunday school back when I was maybe in 4th grade, the latest. And the Sunday school teacher was explaining that to us that no one knows what God's like. And has anyone ever seen God? A classmate asked. And I said, without hesitation, I went, "I have." "Oh, really, Brian?" the teacher asked. "I see him when I look into my mother's eyes." And I'd forgotten about that moment until I was preparing for this sermon. But wow, without realizing it at the time, I see now that my first tangible encounter with God was with the divine feminine. And that makes me think all over again, wow, mothers are powerful.